The 1960s were a wild era for automotive engineering. From the mid-engine sports coupe in the Corvair that was designed by Chevrolet to compete with European sports cars, to the absolutely maniacal Ford GT40, which was a multinational effort perfected by Ford and Carroll Shelby to defeat the legendary reign of Ferrari at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, American manufacturers were essentially trying to throw every idea that they could at a wall to see what would stick. And this also included smaller companies that brought even more out-of-the-box ideas to the public. And one of these ideas and those cars was a full-size two-door luxury car, which not only had a massive 425 cubic inch big block, but it also included a rather unusual front-wheel drive powertrain for an American car of this era. This is the story of one of the most interesting and quirky American cars ever built, the first generation Oldsmobile Toronado. The Toronado began life as a simple painting created by old stylist David North in around 1962. His design was never meant to be created, destined only for the wall on his office. However, not long after he completed it, Oldsmobile was seeking out a new car design for the 1966 production year, and subsequently North's painting was chosen to be taken from paper and turned into an actual amalgamation of machinery. This new car, in typical GM fashion, would be based on the already existing GM E-body shell, which it would share with the 1966 Buick Riviera, which was now entering its second generation of production. This was a much larger chassis than what North had originally envisioned for his new Oldsmobile car, as he planned on using the A-body chassis, which was the same one used by the Chevy Chevelle and Pontiac GTO. But that was overruled in favor of the E-body, and once the order was given, Oldsmobile got to work bringing the Toronado to life, which was finally unveiled October 14th of 1965, and it was one of the most radical designs Oldsmobile to roll out of Oldsmobile's factory over its long 68-year history. A large two-door, swept-lined, fastback-style luxury coupe that came complete with hideaway headlights and was built to compete with the Ford Thunderbird as a luxury option with plenty of added flair for those who dared to be different. The first generation Toronado spanned the production years from 1966 to 1970, but visually, the 1966 to 1967 cars have a much cleaner and more desirable design than the later ones did. The grille design for 66 and 67 was set inside the fenders in almost a pronged style to create a unique grille that would cap off the elongated front end of the Toronado. The car also featured a set of wide, almost Trans Am taillights that spanned most of the rear of the car. Couple these bold styling choices at both ends of the car with the Tornado's extremely defined fender lines, and it was easy to see why the Toronado made such a big splash when it was released. These features were later changed in 1968 to a slightly more conventional set of styling, with the headlights being part of a high-weight system set inside the grille rather than being on top of it. A redesign of the quarter panels was also in this facelift as well that ended in 1970, and if you compare the 1966 to 1970 Toronado side by side, it's very easy to see why people liked the much more pure lines of the early cars more. Now, as mentioned earlier, the Oldsmobile Toronado was part of the GM E-body platform, which was created in 1963 and shared its chassis with the Buick Riviera and Cadillac Eldorado. However, Oldsmobile wanted their new Toronado to step away from their GM counterparts, and they had nearly a decade-old idea that they were ready to unleash to the public, and that was a front-wheel drive system. Now, a front-wheel drive powertrain is very common among imported cars, and even lots of affordable American economy cars today. But back in the 1960s, this was totally not the norm. In fact, the last American automaker to use a front-wheel drive system in this application was Cord all the way back in the 1930s. And to make things even more complicated, Oldsmobile's system was also initially planned to use in the smaller A-body line, but because of its untested and expensive nature, they chose to utilize this running gear in the new luxury platform that would become the Toronado, where there was more margin on the car. This drivetrain would be called the Unitized Power Package, or UPP for short. This design was to be packaged with a rocket V8 engine and transmission in the same engine bay as conventional rear-wheel drive cars of the era. This UPP system itself took 7 whole years to develop and was tested with over 1.5 million test miles that verified the strength and reliability before it was actually mass-produced. This gave Oldsmobile the perfect platform to use their signature Rocket V8 joined to this front-wheel drive system. Joined to this front-wheel drive system was a heavy-duty, 3-speed Hydromatic transmission specifically designed for the Toronado that was called the TH425 in its front-wheel drive form. This was the only transmission offered for the Toronado, as they did not feature a manual for the front-wheel drive system, but it had a fascinating design to get the power to the ground. The transmission torque converter was separate from the actual planetary gear set and transmission itself, and was instead driven through a chain drive that was on two sprockets that did not require any tensioners or pulleys. So essentially, a chain ran off the back of the motor, offset to the actual torque converter, and then the transmission was connected there. This design, known as HIVO, was created by GM's signature transmission group at Hydromatic, as well as Borg-Warner's chain division. The V8 sat up front and was mounted longitudinally like any other car of the time. But to make the front-wheel drive system work, if you look at the schematics, the differential is essentially next to the engine, and the transmission is mounted offset next to the engine as well, and the chain connects the transmission to the motor. Feeding this innovative front-wheel drive system was a rather conventional choice compared to the rest of the car, which was the Oldsmobile 425 Super Rocket V8, rated at 385 horsepower and a whopping 475 foot-pounds of torque. The Toronado drivetrain saw a 20 horsepower increase over the standard 425 and was good for a 0 to 60 time of about 7.5 seconds, a quarter mile time of 16.4 at 93 miles per hour, and an overall top speed of 130, which was nothing to laugh at for a 4,500 pound car that was meant to be a luxury coupe. The facelift in 1968 also brought the option of the new Oldsmobile 455, which made 375 horsepower and 500 foot-pounds of torque. And then in 1970, for the final year of the first-gen Toronado, a 400 horsepower option was offered as well. And you might be wondering, with all the weight hanging over the front end of the car, how did it handle? And well, actually, testers found that the Toronado handling was not very different than what other full-size cars did. And actually, in certain conditions, the Oldsmobile actually was more responsive. They even said that when pushed for more spirited driving, it showed the Toronado had superior handling characteristics. So that begs the question, how did it handle like that? Well, because of the tight space from the drivetrain setup, Oldsmobile opted to use a subframe in the front that featured a torsion bar setup with double wishbones. This was the first passenger car that GM ever utilized a torsion bar front end in the United States. It was also given strengthened A-arms to handle the added weight on the front end. Out back, the car used a slightly more traditional leaf spring suspension with two shocks mounted horizontally from each other to help reduce spring wrap under braking or load. The one downside to the early Toronado, though, was the braking system. When it was originally released in 1966, it featured a hydraulically operated drum brake system, and because of the 4,500 plus pound weight of the Toronado, the brake system itself could overheat within 2 to 3 hard stops, which considerably increased the braking distance for further stops. Now, they solved this by adding vented disc brake options for the front in 67. Granted, this was a luxury car, so no one really expected to push the Toronado to the limits in the turns, but with just 2 or 3 stops causing significant brake fade, there was obviously an issue there. Interestingly, because of the front-wheel drive system that the Toronado used, this removed the need for a transmission tunnel in the interior, which as a result had a totally flat floor to give added legroom for passengers and the ability to seat 6. The interior also featured very modern styling throughout, such as 2 bench seats with the Strato bench option with added armrests for the front seats, as an option for the deluxe trim package, which created an even more premium feel over the already premium base model. They also gave drivers a U-shaped steering wheel with a double delta-shaped horn ring, which framed a unique slot machine-styled speedometer centered in a very nicely laid-out gauge cluster. And when the Toronado officially hit the market, it was seen as an innovative success. In its first year, Motor Trend named the car its 1966 Car of the Year, CarLife's Award for Engineering Excellence, and it was the second American car ever to be awarded recognition in Europe as the third-place winner for European Car of the Year in 1966. In its opening year, Oldsmobile was able to sell just under 41,000 Toronados. 1967, however, saw a drastic 50% dip in sales, partially due to Cadillac's new introduction of their front-wheel drive Eldorado. And then from 1968 to 1970, about 50,000 Toronados would be sold before its redesign would take place and bring out a radically different and much more boxy second generation of the front-wheel drive. But once the Toronado lost its signature styling in the second generation and became, well, a really large rectangle, I think it lost that special something that it had in its earlier years. I'm sure it was still comfortable and in a lot of ways probably a better luxury car than the first generation ones were. But when you see a 1966 Toronado, it's a much different reaction than when you see a 1971, for example. The way you say, oh, it's a Toronado, is said in a much different way between the two generations, which in my opinion is what makes the first gen cars so iconic. Thank you all for watching another episode of our Rare Cars documentary series. If you enjoyed this video, we'll greatly appreciate it if you could drop a like and also share this video with other enthusiasts. Also, please make sure that you've subscribed to the Rare Cars YouTube channel and smash that notification bell for more documentary-style videos just like this on the world's most interesting cars. Until next time, enthusiasts.